Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've had a wonderful week thus far. Today, I have for you the video I've put more effort into than any other since starting my channel, and that is the best Game Week 12 wildcard team. We will, of course, have the team itself. We will have the frameworks for building the wildcard. We will have macro-level strategy. We'll have specific player insights. We will have players being put into different tiers to help you choose from, etc., 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 and so much more, including transfer plans. Now, if you haven't subscribed already, consider doing so because we are close to 5,000 and it would be great to hit that feat before the next Game Week deadline. So many of you watch regularly haven't clicked the button, so if you could just check and press it, I would be very appreciative. And also like the video. Like I said, a lot's gone into it, so I hope you do enjoy it and it brings you some value without anything else needing to be said. Let's hop into the video. Firstly, we will establish a framework, a set of rules to keep in mind when building our wildcard team, because we want to ensure that it aligns with our philosophy and what we think is important. So I've set a few rules here. One is ensuring that we're always considering combinations as opposed to players in isolation. I will give you an example. It is very rare that you will have an A versus B situation for your 15th spot. Maybe you have a forward, right? That is at the exact same price point as another forward, and you're going to sell them both in 2 game weeks. In which case, yeah, sure, it is just A versus B. But as you will see later in this video, there could be the occasion where it's something like Bryan and Bowen versus Bruno Fernandes. And that 0.4, 0.5 difference means that I'll select another player elsewhere, in which case it's A plus B versus C plus D. And furthermore, you will then use your transfers down the line in a different way, because maybe you want to keep one of those players for a week longer. And it will have a variety of effects in the short term, but also the long term. And when you're picking players, I would always look at it as combinations. There's usually combinations in the team. And we'll come on to this when I talk about building backwards. But you have to prioritize certain things and then work backwards from there, I think, as opposed to just picking your goalkeeper, picking your defenders, and then going from there. So that's the first thing. Never really looking at players in isolation within this team. How do they fit into the whole structure and the whole piece of the puzzle? Now, next thing is how I want to use my free transfers, and more so as a set of rules. I would like to use them aggressively, and especially in this winter period when you have 9 game weeks in 42 days, alongside the EFL Cup and the Champions League. It is very likely you will see injuries, rotation, and suspensions in your team. So, for me to pick players with brilliant fundamentals, penalties, 90 minutes, good zone occupancy, etc., alongside having a squad with depth is very important to me, right? Because if I don't do that, there's a good chance that I'll face injuries, rotations, and suspensions, and I will have to use my free transfers defensively. For example, let's say one of my defenders gets injured and I'm playing with a 4.0 in the squad and I already have 4 defenders that I like, and one of them gets injured and one of them gets suspended in the same week. Maybe you'll have to make a transfer there instead of switching someone to a better fixture swing out of one of the attackers. And I don't really want to do that. So I'm building with depth in mind and good rotations between the defenders and attackers specifically. And then the last thing is I'm building backwards. For me, as we've seen this season, it is very important to prioritize the midfielders and maybe even more so the forwards, because there are, a plethora of options in that category. And that's where most of the points have been, given the shifts to the bonus structure, given the shifts to the pricing, and also given the shifts in Premier League managers' philosophies, whereby we're seeing less and less clean sheets and more goals, and there's just in general more attacking quality in the league, resulting in that. So for me, we're going to build this team backwards. We're going to start with the forwards, then we'll go to the midfielders, then defenders, and then the goalkeepers. And last thing when it comes to the team I'm building, and you'll see that because I make some notes of it, I probably have less of a team value than a lot of you guys. So you can upgrade in certain spots. I've also mentioned that in the draft. So everything I say, take with a pinch of salt, because you may be in a slightly different predicament and you could potentially even have a stronger team than myself. But I'm building what is the best wildcard team for me. And the reason I did that is because I probably have a lower budget, right? So it's easier for you to upgrade than it is for you to downgrade and figure the rest out. So yeah, that is something to note. But now let's hop into building the team. Starting with the forwards, as discussed, what I've done is I've put all of them into different tiers so that you understand why I think some are better than others. And it just makes the general selection process a lot easier. Haaland has his own tier, however, because I think he's a completely different conundrum. From an expected points perspective, he's undoubtedly going to be in and around the top, if not at the top, regardless of the fixture set that he has, because of just how good he is, how good Manchester City are. I know they're in a bit of bad form, but right, we can't just take a 4 game week sample, especially when De Bruyne has come back now, as a be-all and end-all. However, it's his price that is so off-putting when looking to bring him in, and especially in a world now where Saka, Salah, Palmer, Bruno, Bryan and Bowen, Isak, Watkins, Jackson, all of these fairly expensive / premium players are looking increasingly attractive. It's very difficult to justify having Erling Haaland at 15.2, 15.3 million, when there aren't as many budget enabling options that you would want in place of the more expensive options, like an Mbeumo, like an Bruno, instead of having a Semenyo or Rodgers, etc. So that is why I've given him his own category. If you are to wildcard in general, you'd likely be wildcarding out of him. And I think if you're going to press the button, you may as well. Because if you're wildcarding into him, what are you really wildcarding for? Now, the fixture set that he has is very difficult. Forest, Spurs, Liverpool, not necessarily in that order, but and then it's like Villa, Man United, Crystal Palace away. It's not easy. It gets a lot easier in game week 18 where we can target him. But until then, you can argue that his ceiling is somewhat limited and it's probably better to go without. I do think that the return of KDB is undoubtedly helpful, but I also think his fixtures now are more difficult than they were prior. I'm not sure City will find a solution instantly because I think they do have some big holes in the squad with regards to what Pep Guardiola is trying to do. Thus, I think it would largely be better to go without Haaland and thought it better to give it own tier. So the next two slides are tier not for me. Now, there are so many forward options, right? I didn't even include it in all of them. For example, there's no Vardy in this because I don't think it's easy to justify having him in. But these are all of the guys I saw people kind of talking about considering that I undoubtedly would not have on a wildcard, and I'm going to justify why I wouldn't have all of them. Now, again, remember it's all relative. Liam Delap, for example, the first person that comes up, is actually a pretty decent option. But I don't think when someone like João Pedro exists at the same price point, it's easy to justify him, or you can justify him at all. And that's the main thing I would say. Whilst I have little bits of analysis and little counterpoints to each of these players, remember that the first and most important reason why all of them aren't being selected is the opportunity cost. And I didn't just want to repeat that each and every time. Let's get into the players, however. And of course, as I said, there is a second slide for the rest. Liam Delap's been very good. At 21 years old, he looks like a really good prospect. Personally, for me, the two fixtures in game week 12 and 13 aren't the best. I like the fixtures after that, but I think in the short term, they aren't the best. And where there are very good fixtures on offer for others, even at a cheap price point, not necessarily just in the forward category, but also the midfield category. For example, you've got Bournemouth, who have good fixtures in the next two game weeks. You've got Semenyo and Evanilson. I just don't think it's the most sensible thing to do to go and place your trust in an Ipswich striker when the fixtures in the short term aren't as good. So that's my justification for there. And as you'll find with these players, we're going to get through them quite quickly because I'd rather spend more time elsewhere in the construction of the team. But I felt it important to at least justify why I'm not going for certain players so you understand my perspective. Jimenez's next three fixtures are great, but in this Christmas period, I can see Mooney's potentially getting a start here and there, maybe one, but also just coming off the bench for him quite consistently. So overall, on average, you can expect his minutes to be reduced down to like a 65 if you consider one benching. And he's also a guaranteed transfer out, right? After those three fixtures, the fixtures aren't as good. You're not going to want him, especially with the expected minutes conundrum, and the ceiling probably won't be there. So you're looking at taking him out. And I don't think you want to be booking in too many transfers, especially not one like this. Continuing with tier not for me. Now, Kai Havertz. In isolation, I would quite like the pick. I think the fixtures are pretty decent for him. I think whilst the creative dynamics since Odegaard's been out have been very poor, and they were poor against Chelsea, they will get better as, Odegaard gets fitter and back into the sides, and Arteta definitely iterates and improves what has been a poor creative dynamic so far, right? So in isolation, I like it. However, at his price, at 8 million, can I really justify it? Because say Arsenal's creative dynamics are not to improve to a certain extent, then maybe his ceiling is capped. And I think we've seen that certainly in recent times. And then the other thing is the opportunity cost. At that price, when Isak and Jackson are knocking about, with their brilliant fixture runs, but with both of their forms, I know Jackson hasn't scored in his last 2 or 3, but mainly I feel like that's results of the fixtures. And we'll talk about him later and why I really, really like him. Can I justify Kai Havertz? And I think not. So for me, that's why I'm foregoing him. Haaland, I think everything that we've seen from Amorim and Gregores suggests that Haaland will do very well as the channel runner in this side. But the fixtures are fairly short term, and even Everton with Branthwaite back could be a bit difficult from a defensive standpoint. And Ipswich, after a win away, they've had some good periods in games as well. May not be as easy as people think. I think the uncertainty just surrounding how United are going to integrate within that 3-4-3 system and how he's going to play, because another thing is, right, he hasn't hit the ground running this year. So is he all of a sudden going to pick up form? And then the price. At 6.9, he acts as a blocker to maybe not too many people directly, but okay, he's significantly more expensive than a João Pedro. He's a lot cheaper than an Isak, but he's still in and around that like 1 million less price point, whereby if you were just to downgrade significantly, you could use that a lot of money elsewhere, even on an Van Nissen. So for me, I wouldn't be going there. Welbeck, I think his expected minutes are going to reduce with João Pedro coming to the side. We saw, for example, João Pedro going to 9 and Ruta coming to the 10 when Welbeck got hooked, and it was João Pedro initially in the 10. I think Evan Ferguson just getting fitter and fitter, knocking on the door. I think just in general with the fixture congestion, he's going to see some rotation. And I do worry about his ceiling slightly. I believe him only to have 1 haul this year. I think maybe it's 2. I might be wrong, but I think he only has 1 haul this year. And just in general, you're not really expecting too much from him in terms of the ceiling, as well as Brighton have been playing and as good as he's looked. So for me, I'd be leaving him out. Wissa is pretty similar to someone like Haaland in the sense that the next 2 fixtures I like, and I think they're there for the taking. He's different in the sense that he's been in red hot form and he's really, really good. But with the fixtures from 14, I feel him to be a transfer out. And again, it's coming to the opportunity cost, and that's the main thing. Some of these other strikers have such brilliant fixtures for the medium to long term, and even in the short term, that I think it's just not worth it when he's almost a guaranteed transfer out. But I think of this side, he may be the best one because at least you're getting short-term upside, and he's looked so good in general. And it's not to say that, for example, in 14, he can't exploit Villa, right? Because strikers have had a lot of good fortune against them. And then Wood and Strand Larsen. Now, I'll start with Strand Larsen because there is nothing I like about him as an option, right? As you will see discussed later, I don't particularly like the next 3 as a set of fixtures. I don't think Bournemouth at home is too bad, but when you include Fulham away and Everton away, I don't love it. And in general, I think his ceiling is somewhat capped due to the amount of chances that are created for him through Wolves' general build-up and creative department. I'm really not a huge fan of what I've seen from them so far. And again, look at who he blocked. So for me, not there. Now, Chris Wood has been absolutely magnificent so far, right? But the fixtures are really turning. And if you look at the goals he scored so far, a lot of them are from slightly more settled situations where the opposition's block is slightly more settled. He hasn't had to sprint a huge distance. He hasn't had to do any form of channel running. He doesn't do that too much anyway. And they're largely not on transition, his goals, and not from counter-attacks. However, against and at the Emirates, away at Manchester City, Man United, Aston Villa, all of these sides, I think Forest almost going to have to engage in a game whereby they sit a little bit deeper and then hit them on the counter-attack, and in general, they create chances through transition, like they did away at Anfield. And for those games, I think Wood will be very much used as a hold-up striker to get out, but he's not the most devastating on transition or the counter-attack. And I think if you look at his catalogue of goals, those aren't going to be as on offer as they were in the other fixtures. So I expect them to dry up, and for me, that makes him an absolute no-go, especially when others are going to keep him, right? It's a nice differential to have. Now let's get onto the players I actually like and am considering. And firstly, we're going to start with Ollie Watkins and Van Nissen. Now, 2 very, very different assets in their own right. Watkins, I would say, is the more volatile asset here. He could be brilliant. He could also be absolutely horrific given his price tag. Now, there are a few things. One, he himself probably hasn't looked as sharp as you would like from a finishing standpoint. His expected minutes have been slightly reduced because, one, you've got the Champions League, but mainly you've got John Duran constantly knocking on that door. On the flip side, the fixtures are there, and he is a top player playing in a very good team, and you expect them to probably get better, right? So it makes it very difficult. For me, however, the reason he's not higher is his price, and it's probably why I think you can leave him out, because to go for him, for me, as you'll see, I really like Isak and Jackson. And to justify him over one of them, I would find very difficult given they're cheaper, given they're both, I'd say they look sharper at the moment and they're in better form. And the fixtures they have are also very good. But to have all 3 of them, again, where do you then, chop the budget, essentially? Do you significantly reduce the midfield? Well, I'm not sure losing an asset like Saka is the most intelligent thing to do, especially during this Christmas period when his expected minutes are undoubtedly going to be better than Watkins. So for me, personally, this is why he finds himself in tier 4. I couldn't put him in the you don't need, not for me category because he is still so dangerous. The fixtures are there, and if he catches fire, he's undoubtedly one of the better assets and has, in general, I'd say a higher ceiling than most. But I couldn't put him any higher for the same reasons. Van Nissen, I really like. I think the fixtures are brilliant. I think he's looked sharper. I do wonder if the expected minutes may be slightly reduced compared to some of the other forwards. And then the main thing for me, right? 2 main things. One, he is really good in his own right. But one, does he act as a blocker to João Pedro, who I will explain to you why I really like in the future. And then the other thing is he's also more expensive. And then the other thing is Bournemouth's style slightly limiting of their individual players' ceiling, and do the profiles they have in their squad also limit their ceiling? Something I spoke about with Semenyo in the past is how they lack a creative within the side, and a lot of their chances in general are generated through their hybrid high pressing, right? And I think that means that it could fall to pretty much any of the front four. Whereas in other sides where you have City and you have a creative dynamic within that system that is very much built for Haaland, he's going to accumulate all of the big chances pretty much and a lot of the XG. Whereas I don't see that to be the same thing for Bournemouth, given the difference in philosophy. And that is just something I consider with all Bournemouth assets, particularly Evanescent and Semenyo, that you may be getting somewhat of a limited ceiling as a result of not having a super creative number 10 and the system just in general. Matthias Cunha finds himself all alone in tier 3. And similar to Watkins, let's first establish the positives and then we can discuss the negatives. He has a lot of the fundamentals. Not all of them, but he has a lot of the fundamentals going for him. Penalties, expected minutes, general quality, level of goal threat, etc., etc. And he's just in general a very good footballer. His technical level, his passing, which can certainly generate him assists, as you saw against Southampton. And this is slightly more niche piece of analysis, but he's got a lot of different type of passes in his locker, and that's some of the more creative ones, and ones that can lead to assists, which is very helpful to generate assists. His ball carrying is elite and arguably his best trait. Ball striking, he's super strong, and what you'll find is even in these difficult instances where maybe he's on the touchline, slightly awkward bounce, and the opposition's defender is in a good space, he still managed to get out of that situation or just keep the ball in a lot of tight, difficult situations because of how strong and well his body functions within the football scope. Okay, so there are a lot of positives, and he can generate attacking returns solely because of how good he is. And this is something we touched on prior. He's also got a very, very lovely fixture run between Game Week 15 and 17. Now, there are two reasons why he's in this tier and not a higher one. Firstly, and at a lesser importance, is the opportunity cost. Because I really, really do like Jackson and Isak, and I think in terms of the squad structuring, he does block one of them, right? And we'll discuss how much I like them in the future, very short future. But the main thing is Wolves. I think him as a player, what a player. And I've loved him as a player for so long. And as you saw against Southampton, both the assist and the goal, through his ball carrying, a great pass, and a brilliant strike, he can generate its returns out of nowhere, purely based on his own quality. However, I think against the better side, you do need help from your team, and you do need help from the team dynamics and the system. I don't think Wolves really have too much of a creative in this side. I think he has so much responsibility in terms of other aspects of the game, just whether it be progression, ball carrying, etc. And I also don't think that the creative dynamics in this side are anywhere close to optimized, and they don't really have that type of player. And I think against the better sides where they don't allow them to transition as much, and that's Fulham and Everton, they really don't let you do that too much to them. You're going to struggle to create chances for Wolves. And as good as his level of quality is, I don't want to just be solely relying on him producing me a bit of magic again and again and again. I'd rather have at least the team doing something for him, and I really don't think they're doing too much for him at all. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Wolves are in a relegation fight for a little bit longer than people think. So for me, that's why I'm not super keen on him, and I also think that limits his ceiling somewhat. Look, there are all the positives that I've discussed, but I also think there are slightly more negatives than are maybe being considered. Now we get on to the players that I really, really like, and the first one, who's already been spoken about quite a bit, is Alexander Isak. Prior to Nottingham Forest, we had 10 games this season, and Newcastle had only scored 10 goals. That is diabolical for a side of that stature, a club of that stature, and a side with that much talent, right? There was a clear chance creation issue there, and I think a lot of it stemmed from Gordon playing on the right. However, Gordon played on the right against Forest, but House switched it and had a more fluid dynamic between his left winger and left eight in Joe Linton and Joe Willock, and you definitely saw Lewis Hall's putting a stamp on the game in terms of what he was doing going forward. And it definitely helped. It helped significantly, and they could have even scored more in that Forest game. And I think Howe's shown this season. He's shown some innovative solutions and that he's willing to be flexible. He did it from a defensive standpoint against City very, very well, going man-to-man high and then transitioning into a 5-4-1. He did it against Arsenal, where he made his side very difficult to beat. And he's now shown another attacking version of that against Forest. So I think with that standard of coaching, alongside the quality in the Newcastle side and the improvement in fixtures, they're undoubtedly going to score more and more goals now. Not to mention how Alexander Isak has just looked sharper and sharper and sharper, and he's just looked better and better and better. Then we go back to the framework. The quality of the player is there. The fixtures are there. The expected minutes are there. The role he plays, not too much of a channel runner, right? He stays centrally. He can exploit space in behind. If you put it into him, he can do pretty well. The zonal occupancy is good, and he has penalties, right? So from a fundamental standpoint, brilliant. And like I said, establishing the framework where I'm building backwards, I really want my big hitters in, and then I can build around them. And Isak, I think, is one of them because the ceiling is really high, as we've seen in the past, and he has the quality to produce within those fixtures. So I really, really like him. And as you'll see, he's in my wildcard draft. João Pedro, one of the reasons he's here is he is so cheap at 5.4, right? That is so cheap. Then you've got the fixtures, and specifically in the rotation that I have him in, spoiler alert, I have Rodgers. He works wonderfully with him, and he's got Leicester and Southampton, well, Southampton and Leicester in 13 and 15, which you will absolutely want to play him for. And even if he is a slightly expected minutes worry, like I said, with the depth in the squad that I have, and the fact that Rodgers has good fixtures in general, I can by all means bench him, and there's no issue, especially considering how cheap he is. With regards to his expected minutes, I think they're a lot better than people think because Hertzler loves him. He talks about how much of a character he is in that side, how much of a leader he is, and I think that's a big thing just for him staying on the pitch. And also, he works so hard off the ball. The other thing is, I feel like he might be a cut above in terms of what Hertzler is looking for in terms of quality, so that probably keeps him on the pitch for longer. Then you look at the fixtures that we spoke about. He's a fantastic facilitator in terms of price, the Rodgers rotation, and the quality. All the things we've discussed, all the things which fits into the fundamentals and frameworks that we have established. So for me, with the ceiling that this type of guy has as well, look what he did against City, a haul in such a short space of time. Against the worst sides, he can definitely hurt them. And in the minutes he's had so far, he's blanked against Everton, but Brighton looked fantastic in game week 1, and he easily could have had a return. They scored 3. He returned against Arsenal. He returned against Man United. He hauled against City. And he hasn't really had too many minutes outside of that. So for me, I'm absolutely expecting someone, when he has better fixtures, who's looked this good, to really kick on and be a fantastic asset. Now, I haven't put him in tier 1 because I don't think he's a whole tier above João Pedro and Isak, but he gets the top spot at tier 1.5, and that is, of course, Nicholas Jackson. Let's start with the elite fixture run, and I think this is probably what has decided that I put him in this top spot. 1, Leicester, a promoted team. And I don't want to just say a promoted team and be like, oh, target them, right? Because as I've established, they're definitely better than people think. But with the greatest respect, they are still probably a bottom 3, bottom 4 side in the league. Aston Villa have shown how susceptible they are to forwards who can exploit space in behind, are athletic, have a really good physical presence, and Jackson ticks all of those boxes. Southampton, similar to Leicester, albeit, again, I think they're somewhat better than people say. However, their style is certainly inviting in terms of being able to turn over the ball from high and profiting from those type of situations. Tottenham, you saw his hat-trick last season. They will play their way, Highline or Highway, as we put, and he's definitely very well stationed to exploit that, especially when you have a creative behind him like Cole Palmer, which we'll come to. And Brentford just have a love affair of goals. There's no point going into some really deep analysis because you know he's going to get chances in that game. Having a creative like Palmer behind you is a massive plus because you're going to get chances as a striker that others just won't. He also has very good movement. And combining those two things, like Palmer will create for him, and he will have, I think, a plethora of chances across these 5 games, right? His own occupation's good. I like his dynamic with Palmer where he drops in and Palmer will run on from him at times. Because Cole is such a good player, you'll also be able to generate assists from there. I think the only thing is he's on 4 yellow cards. But as I've established, I'm building a squad with depth. And you know what? If he gets a yellow card, then so be it. He'll miss 1 game. But I'd still want him from all the others around it. So for me, there is absolutely nothing to suggest that Nicholas Jackson shouldn't do very well. Chelsea have shown themselves to be a flat track bully of sorts as well. And when you present them with somewhat optimal conditions in which to score goals from, they will absolutely bite your hand off. So for me, the best forward in the game currently, and one I'm really looking forward to owning. So now you can deduce that we will be lining up in a 3-5-2 this week. João Pedro will be on the bench for Rodgers, and this is going to be my forward line to start. Not only is it going to be my forward line to start, but as you'll see with the transfer plans, which I talk about loosely, they aren't going anywhere, and they should be locked at least until game week 18. The construction of the midfield and defensive lines were far, far easier than that of the forward line because there are just simply far, far fewer options. And let's start with building that now. 2 locks in my side that we were building around is Cole Palmer and Mohamed Salah. For me, Cole Palmer is the best asset in the game now because I would say pound for pound, he provides more value than Salah, considering he's so much cheaper, and the fact that his fixtures, I would say, are significantly better, and the fact that I think you're going to captain him more. Salah, the only negative is that I don't think the fixtures are that good. Southampton away is good, obviously. I just don't think it's as good as maybe people say. And then it's like City, Newcastle, Everton away, Fulham away, which I don't think is easy at all. But he's in such good form. Where else are you going to spend the money, especially if you're not going for Haaland? Is it really worth the risk? No. Probably not, almost absolutely not. So for me, those 2 are locks. Albeit, if you are to go with Salah, I think whilst not great, it's not the worst thing I've ever seen in FPL, albeit not great. Right, now, let's establish the fifth midfielder. And that, for me, will be between Rodgers and Semenyo. Two cheap assets that have a lot going for them in their own rights, and they have very good fixtures, which is probably the most important thing that puts them in this category. Now, I will say there is not a lot between them. I personally have gone for Rodgers, but I really do need to save the 0.4 million there. Okay, I've obviously spoken about Semenyo ceiling in the Evanison section, but I would say maybe his output rate in general and thus his ceiling is slightly higher, just given he might be a slightly more clinical player, albeit I think his finishing can improve. However, on the other hand, he's got 4 yellow cards. But then on the other hand, I do think that his expected minutes will be better than Rodgers, given Rodgers also has to compete in the Champions League. So I'm not going to say like, oh, this one's better than the other, because I really don't think that I have clarity around which one I prefer. I would, however, say, for me personally, I'm doing it to save the 0.4 million. You can choose which way to go. And honestly, I don't think there's the wrong answer or a wrong answer. They both rotate very nicely with João Pedro. And yeah, I don't think there's much between it. If I absolutely had to choose and budget wasn't an issue, I think I would go Semenyo, just because I think I prefer the fixtures over a longer term slightly more. But like I said, budget is always going to be an issue, even if you think it's not. At 0.4 is quite a bit. So yeah, that's where I land with that. We have established 3 midfield spots. And let's now establish the 4th, and that will be between Bryan and Bruno Fernandes. Now, for me, this is only going to be for a 2 game week span, because I would very much like Jared Bowen in game week 14. The fixtures from 14 onwards are absolutely magnificent for him, right? They're really, really good. And the other thing is, look how well he's been doing in a West Ham side that have been really struggling and not exactly supporting him or platforming him well to generate returns within FPL and thus output. He has 50 points in 11 games. That's really, really good for a guy who has had a lot against him, including a fixture one which hasn't been particularly easy. From 14 to 18, his fixtures are a lot better. You expect with more and more time that goes on, Lopetegui to have a better grasp of his squad and be able to perform slightly better. He has 90 minutes in every game. He will be on penalties when Paquetá is not there. And in general, I still think his open play goal threat is there, even though West Ham have been struggling so much. So for me, and there's a ceiling, and he's proven. So for me, in game week 14, he becomes not essential, but a very, very lucrative selection, especially when you consider that you get some money out of Bruno and Bryan, which could help down the line. And just general getting on him early means that you can accumulate some value there when you do want to sell him eventually in 18. And we will talk about that a little bit down the line. Okay, so who do I go for? Bruno Fernandes or Bryan Mbeumo? Now, you are probably not in the same position as me. This 0.4, 0.5 here is probably not going to affect you as much as it has done to myself. Thus, I've currently selected Bryan Mbeumo. However, I do have an iteration with a Bruno Fernandes draft. In terms of if I did have the money, like I probably would if I was in your situation, what do I prefer? For me, I still think I prefer the Leicester at home fixture as opposed to any of the other 3. And that's why I've gone in Bryan Mbeumo. I really like that Leicester at home fixture. The other thing is, with Bruno, there's a lot of unknowns. I'm sure that he'll probably play that right forward spot, right? Under Amorim. But I have no idea how United are going to function under Amorim. And that is therefore certainly taking some risk. On the other hand, Bryan Mbeumo's stats actually haven't been great. Non-penalty stats have not been great in the last 2 or 3. And I think his numbers have certainly been on the decline, and he's been playing pretty wide, right? So that's the counter argument there. One strategy I did think of was having Bruno for Ipswich away, switching to Mbeumo for Leicester at home, and then getting Bowen in 14. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. I'm just not sure in my case it's the most efficient use of transfers when I don't have one stored. But that is a strategy that I thought I would show you. For me, again, between Bruno and Bryan, there really isn't too much in it. I don't think you can necessarily make a wrong choice. I'm going Bryan from the start, at least, in terms resultant of budget. But you could very easily justify Bruno, even with the unknowns that surrounding him, given the form he's picked up and given the fixtures that are there. So we established the 4 midfield spots, and you will see the 5th on screen. Now, what I would say is, compared to the forward category, I don't really feel like I'm massively missing any assets. So that's nice. One that was, I guess, 50-50 in a lot of people's minds was Bukayo Saka worth the money? And I come back to what we said at the start in terms of establishing the framework. I want players with brilliant fundamentals. He provides me that. When in the Havertz section, I spoke about Arsenal improving. I really do think that they will. He will be at the absolute forefront of that. The fixtures are, I think, decent for him specifically, because I don't think he'll get doubled up on as much as maybe some other sides have done so. For example, okay, Forest will sit pretty deep, but I don't think that's necessarily the worst thing in the world because he is a magician and certainly able to unlock defenses like that. West Ham have shown how susceptible they are to transitions. Obviously, United will play a back five, but I think they'll certainly have a bit of a go. And in general, Amorim, in certain parts of his system and philosophy, is quite aggressive. And when we're not having Haaland, I think it's very easy to fit in Bukayo Saka. And you've seen how well he's done with the minutes he's had, right? Like, he's had a lot less minutes than Cole Palmer and Bryan Mbeumo, who have both scored more points than him. And I think if you were to average it out, it's not too distant, right? So for me, it makes a lot of sense to have Bukayo Saka and essentially not overthink it. Because are there any other options that have significant upside whereby they can massively overtake Bukayo? No, probably not. So I think just going for the safer option here and a proven asset and a very, very good asset makes a lot of sense. Now, maybe what I spent more time on than anything else was building this defense once I was given my budget. And this is what I came up with. And I'm actually very proud of this side. So I've shown you from Gameweek 12 to 17 exactly what defenders will feature. And underneath, you have the corresponding fixtures in the correct order so you know who plays who. So for example, Colwell in Gameweek 14 is the middle selection there, and he therefore has Southampton away. This fixture run and this fixture set that has been put together as a result of this budget is really, really nice in my opinion. Now, when I went about building this, I was pretty adamant that I only wanted one premium, and that will be Gabriel. I like his fixture run, and he, of course, has a lot of box threat, and he's plays for the best defense in the league. One thing I would say is, and I mentioned this on X, since Marino's come into the side, I actually think his set-piece threat has declined somewhat reasonably, and I would definitely keep that in mind with regards to how bullish you are on him, because maybe you're not as bullish on the Arsenal defense as I am, or you don't see them as important, and therefore I think with the box threat decreasing, you can potentially go without him. I wouldn't say he's as essential as he was maybe from game week 6. Now, one thing here is there's no Ryan Aït-Nouri, and I can't afford him in my draft, but as I said, it's better for you to upgrade than to downgrade. So you could easily make Colwell Ryan Aït-Nouri, and in the exact games that Colwell plays, that's when you play Aït-Nouri. And you could probably even play him in one more. I think it's to be game week 13, where I don't think it's too bad, or game week 14 as well, right? So that's that. If you want Ryan Aït-Nouri, you can have him. The reason I'm not I would like to have him, but the reason I don't have him, budget aside, is that I don't think they're going to keep too many clean sheets. I haven't seen enough from them. And yeah, that's the main reason. I just don't rate Wolves that highly, basically, as I spoke about in the Cunha section. I don't think they'll keep too many clean sheets. He'll obviously get attacking returns, or he'll very likely get attacking returns given the positions he's taking up, and that's why he would be preferable. But I don't think it's the end of the world to go without. You look at that fixture set, right? And one thing I like is Palace and West Ham haven't really hit form yet. Both have injuries. Both are losing two of their best players at the moment in terms of Eze and Kudus. So I think having my defenders against them now and early is better than having against them later, where they can certainly pick up some form. I faced Southampton three times. I have Leicester twice. I have Ipswich once. There's 18 fixtures there, and 6 of them are already from promoted sides. So that's what, a third? Then I've got 5 fixtures of West Ham and Crystal Palace. I've got Everton twice, who aren't maybe the sharpest attack. I think Forest are a good attack, but one that rely in bigger games more so on their transitional and counter-attacking threat, which I don't think is like unbelievable and out of this world. So the fixtures I've got from this set is really good. I think Gabriel and Konsa and Dunk, to a lesser extent, have decent box threat, so I can get attacking returns from there. And Colwell as well, on a similar level as to Dunk. And then Hall also has good open play threat, specifically assist threat with the role he's playing. Now, the one thing this allows me to do is just bank a lot of transfers until 18. And as you will see on the side, I'm just looking to roll with 18. I have so much depth. I have good rotations. I can always get favorable fixtures. I don't really need to go chasing upside elsewhere because I have a lot of upside in my side. And this will allow for me to get Erling Haaland back in game week 18 when he has a favorable fixture on. And again, I wanted to spend the money up top and in the midfield. So I've gone with the cheaper defense, but I think it works. Honestly, I don't think you really need Guardiola with his fixtures. And outside of him, there's not too many premiums. So now you can see the final team, what it looks like, how it lined up. And there is, of course, Verbruggen there. Now, I think all of the goalkeepers have fairly significant negatives attached with them. I think for Bryan, for example, the style of football they play means they're always going to concede quite a few chances, right? Whereas with someone like Sells, you would concede a few chances, but they would be like low to mid-level XG shots, and you're not going to concede too many chances in the game with the way Forest play. However, I think Brighton are more susceptible to that. That does, however, simultaneously increase my ceiling. I think Verbruggen's looked absolutely magnificent, and he himself, just through his own quality, will, similar to Cunha, will generate me returns because of the fact that he'll save things that he probably shouldn't. Brighton's fixture run is magnificent. So why have I gone for him over Sanchez when I think those are the two best options? For me, again, budget is a big deal. I have the ability now to have a 4.5 and a 4.7, but I think going Sanchez is absolutely fine. There's something about Bryan at the moment that I just trust, hence why I have a triple up there and a double up in defense, which I'll only play for the Leicester and Southampton fixtures, right? So that is something to bear in mind. But yeah, somewhat of a gut feel, honestly, in terms of just how Brighton are going to perform. Somewhat because of how good I've seen him be, and I think Sanchez could maybe be dropped because I'm not his biggest fan anyway. I think he's not a keeper that's going to take Chelsea to the level that we need. And the other thing is, like I mentioned, I need the money, and maybe you don't, so you can go Sanchez, right? But it's always better to upgrade than downgrade. The last thing is, in terms of transfer plans and strategy, I'm basically looking to roll, aside from Game Week 14 when I bring Jared Bowen in, until Game Week 18, so that I will have 5 free transfers, and I can use that to then bring in Haaland in Game Week 18 and massively restructure the squad. The only 2 caveats to this are, one, this side on screen, I'm 0.1 off. And whilst the 3.9 goalkeeper exists, he is from Brighton, which would mean that I would have to take out Lewis Dunk in the form of another player, or maybe I'd just have to switch my goalkeeper around completely. I am hoping I catch a double rise or someone falls, and I don't have to do that. But if I do, then I can, of course, accommodate. The actual last thing is, I obviously spoke about in the Bruno Fernandes, Bryan and Bowen section of potentially using that jump on, jump off strategy, where I have Bruno for this week and Mbeumo for next week. Now, that would require me to downgrade one of my defenders. And if I were to downgrade, like, let's say a Colwell, then I would just play Conte this week. And that would be fine because I would have a pretty decent fixture in Crystal Palace at home. And that would also mean, though, I would have to use a transfer down the line. Another one, right? So I'd be using 2 transfers. So I'd be rocking up to Game Week 18 with 3 frees as opposed to 5. So if I wanted Haaland back, I'd have to take a hit. It's also slightly more risky just in general using transfers like that in case other problems crop up and I'll have less to do so. Now, it's unlikely I do that, but I see some upside to it. So there is the potential, but like I said, unlikely. I certainly do hope you enjoy that. I hope you understand now why I've picked certain players, not just due to individual preferences, but how they function within a certain structure and how they serve as combinations. Like I said, I put more effort into this video than I have ever done for a YouTube video. So a like on the video would be very, very much appreciated. If you haven't subscribed, consider doing so. We're close to 5,000 subscribers, and hitting that sooner rather than later would be absolutely magnificent. Have a great, great day. Enjoy the international break, and I shall see you shortly.